Welcome to the Ref Show. Good weekend for referees, not necessarily a good weekend for football. Despite all the cup upsets, lots of them in the FA Cup fourth round, but referees are still very much in the competition. A good weekend for them. Maybe that's because they didn't field a weakened lineup, Brian Deane and Dean Mohareb. First of all, to you, Brian, what do you make of it? Okay, these shocks are great and we love them, but they're being devalued, aren't they?
Yeah, it depends which way you look at it, to be honest. I mean, for me, you know, any of the sides who have been involved in cup upsets should be able to put out a team still that should beat those teams. You know, for me, I think you take it away from the fault of the manager, because the manager will get stick for not using his squad. But on the other hand, you know, in two cases, you're looking at non-league teams. And, you know, how many of those non-league players will get into that squad? You know. But
that's all the more damning then on the
exactly,
teams.
It's down to player preparation for me. You know, sorry to say it, and I don't want to harp on about the good old days, but I remember when I was playing and we were playing in FA Cup games, you know, we would take it as an affront to get beaten by a team from the lower division. And so you did what you had to do. You matched them for physicality, mentality, and of course, because you've got superior technique, you would come out on top.
Well, I'll tell you what, though, in those days, Brian, you'd play most of a first team, a team that's used to playing at that level and play with each other, wouldn't you?
Look, the game's moved on. I'm not denying that, but still, you've got players who are at those top clubs now, picking up good money, and they should be able to win those games.
But they're not equipped for that. Say National League style football, and that's taking nothing away from Lincoln City or from Sutton United or whatever.
Absolutely not. You know, don't get me wrong. Fantastic achievement for those clubs. But at the end of the day, what are we preparing our footballers for?
Yeah, but it happens over and over again. And managers say, well, those players, you know, I defend the team because those players should be capable, but they're not, and it keeps happening. What do you think? Is this ripping off football fans, apart from anything else?
I think there's no doubt that the FA Cup over the past few years has been devalued in terms of the selections that teams put out. I mean, when you get championship teams putting weakened sides out, when you get a team like Southampton, who won in the Cup midweek, are safe in the Premier League, and then put a weakened side out in the FA Cup, it leaves you scratching your head. And something needs to be done about it, because ultimately the FA Cup is, without a shadow of a doubt, historically, the most prestigious cup competition in the world, but it is being devalued. There's no doubt about that.
Brian, even the Checker Trade Trophy, you have to have a minimum number of first teamers in it to try to protect a much maligned competition. Should the FA Cup follow that?
No, I don't think so.
Right.
I mean, if you get to the point where you have like the Checker Trophy, what's the point playing in a competition like that? You know, and if teams don't want to be in the FA Cup, if they don't see it as a fantastic opportunity, then, you know, do without the fixture. Just before the season starts, say we do not want to be in the FA Cup.
Have teams allowed to say, no, we're not in it this year?
I think Manchester United did it years ago, didn't they?
It was hugely controversial.
Yeah, but for me, you know, every team should be going out to win every trophy they can. You cannot look at a cup competition like the FA Cup and say, well, you know, we'll play a weakened team. You know, it's a double-edged sword, because every player in those squads, be it Liverpool, whoever, should be good enough to go in and at least give a better account of themselves.
They should be, but consistently they're proven not to be, because they're not equipped for the kind of football.
Well, yeah, we're not equipping our players correctly then. You know, it's got to be something like that. You can't blame the manager every time. The manager goes out and picks a team that he thinks he's going to win a game.
Have you noticed something, folks? We're not talking about referees. That's because, Dean Mohareb, they've had a good weekend, haven't they?
Yeah, they
you
have.
guys, yeah?
Yeah, they have, yeah. Yeah, they've had a very good weekend. I think it is FA Cup, the different type of games. There's a lot more pressure in a cup game, because particularly when you've got non-league teams against league teams, good atmosphere in the ground. You know, I watched Sutton United at weekend, and atmosphere was fantastic. Lincoln, absolutely brilliant. So there's a lot more pressure from that point of view, but there's also the fact that these referees at weekend are not being judged by this dreaded evaluation system. They've got an assessor at the ground, they're getting instant feedback.
Old school.
Absolutely, and I think it makes a difference, Alan.
Because we always used to say, oh, the bad old assessor, you know, the assessor in the stand, cramping the referee for common sense, etc. But the referees prefer that.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And I think, if you take a player's point of view, you cannot imagine a team coming off at the end of the game and not having instant feedback from the manager on how they've played at half-time, at full-time. And that's the role of the assessor. And yes, there are good assessors, yes, there are bad assessors, but over a season it averages out. And I think the problem you've got with the evaluation system is it takes away the management of the game. Very black and white. The assessor will look at the referee who's proactive, the referee who prevents things from happening. The evaluation system simply judges them on decisions.
It's a great point, it really is a great point. Let's go specifically to one or two games. Obviously, Brighton's 3-1 defeat at Lincoln. Now, this all hinged really on a decision from a referee. This was Andy Madley, because Lincoln were trailing 1-0. There was a penalty shout, which I think in real time was a bit obscure, but he called it, didn't he? This was Glenn Murray's foul.
He did, and I've got to say, Andy Madley is one of these referees who really needs to be given a Select Group 1 game. He's an excellent referee. He's showing a lot of potential and promise, and in a game like that, a decision as crucial as that, he got it spot on. So very well done, Andy Madley.
Well done, Andy Madley, and well done, Lincoln City. Twice they've beaten Championship teams and dominated them. Yeah,
I mean, to the two guys who have gone in there as well, all you hear is good things about the way how they've revolutionised the club, and it's a good little club, Lincoln. I've had some friends of mine who have played there over the years, and I'd love to see them back in the league. They're a good League Two team.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Me too. I've covered many a game over there in the Football League, and in the shadow of the cathedral there. It's a great backdrop, a great place for football, isn't it, really? What a fantastic tie, that 7-goal thriller, and heartbreak for Gareth Ainsworth's Wycombe Wanderers, losing 4-3 at Spurs in the end. That tipped one way and then the other. Roger East was referee there. Now, there was a penalty for each side in that. Now, with my just layman's football fans hat on, I actually thought he got both of them correct. But what did you think, Dean?
The first one I can understand because the defender from Tottenham's gone in a careless manner, so I can understand him giving the penalty. The second one, if I'm honest, I didn't think was a penalty. I thought the defender has used his experience, come across, got the ball. I thought it was a fair challenge. But saying that, I think it's one of those incidents, Alan, that splits the room. 50% will say it was. 50% will say it wasn't.
There's the other 50% sitting next to you.
The one thing I will say about Roger...
He's not sure.
No, the one thing I'll say about Roger East, I feel sorry for Roger East, Alan. He's not refereed a Premier League game for 10 weeks. He's been put into an FA Cup game of that importance on Saturday. And then midweek, he's got Southampton-Swansea, which is massive, absolutely massive game. So I feel sorry for Roger. I think he's not being appropriately appointed. And I think the powers that be need to have a look at that. And that appointment midweek could break him.
You think?
I do, yeah.
Serious as that?
I do, yeah. I think if that goes pear-shaped midweek, that could lead to his removal at the end of the season. And I don't think that's fair on the referee.
That's a big statement. Mike Jones was the referee. We're kind of nitpicking a little bit because most referees had a really great weekend, but there was a big refereeing talking point on this. This was Crystal Palace 0, Manchester City 3, because it was 0-0 when Yaya Toure, who'd already been cautioned, commits a cynical foul that, I don't know, should that have been a yellow card? Should he have been removed at that point?
Should have been cautioned. He stopped a promising attack. If anything, I thought Mike Jones could have potentially managed the first caution. But once he's cautioned for that, the second one is stonewall.
What do you think, Brian?
I agree. I agree with Dean. The first one for me was a bit wishy-washy. I think the second one was a yellow card, but he's probably assessed the whole situation in about 5 seconds and thought, well, the first one was probably not a sending off.
He's realised.
So he's thought, well, okay, if he does it again, he's off. But
Sam Allardyce having a terrible time. He wasn't happy, but I did like this quote. He says, "I've got more than enough to worry about with conceding goals without moaning about referees," he said, which I think is really fair comment.
Sensible approach.
Yes. Brian, your former team, Leeds United, the victims of a shock at Sutton United. Stuart Atwell was in charge of this. Good performance, sir.
Excellent. And I'd like to see referees like Stuart, Andy Madley, Paul Tierney being given more high-profile games. Kevin Friend, Neil Swarbrick. Better games, high-profile games, because Stuart refereed that superbly well at weekend. Had a really good game, give a penalty. Absolutely spot on.
Big call. And Leeds United going so well in the Championship. All right, 10 changes. There's the reason for that result, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's too many changes. But and I've defended him in the one side, but it's tough going to those kind of places, especially playing on 3G with artificial turf. The problem with that is that in a player's mind, they can make more of a it can make it more of an excuse than it actually is, because it's actually a good surface to play on.
Okay, Brian, thanks very much indeed. Thank you to Dean. Rejoin us for part 2 of the Ref Show. Plenty more to come, including the joys of being a manager and watching from the stand. It really can be a lot better experience. Ask Arsene Wenger. See you.